Many Australians may not realise that Australia has a rich Christian heritage. From the earliest days of the founding of the colony in New South Wales, there is evidence of God's hand and God's people being heavily involved in the architecture and the creation of this colony. We're joined today by Graham McLennan. He founded the Christian History website. He's the chairman of the National Alliance of Christian Leaders, and he's also a founding board member for Vision Christian Media. Graham, welcome.
Well, welcome, sir.
Graham, as I said in the introduction, many Australians know that we were once a convict settlement, but that's about as far as their historical knowledge goes. But there's an incredible Christian influence from the very earliest days of Australia, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. And if you permit me to just read a little statement here about Reverend Richard Johnson, because he was on the First Fleet. And to be concise, he arrived with the First Fleet on the 20th of January, and that, of course, was in Botany Bay, 1788. Then on the 3rd of February, he conducted the first Christian service on Australian soil. There were on ships and other things, even near La Perouse, the French, and there are other information that have services or some Christian contact before. As Australians' first chaplain, spent 12 years in Australia from 1780 with several roles as chaplain, parish priest, and as a Indigenous community. William Newton, the former slave trader race fame, were the chief sponsors of the Botany Bay Chaplain, becoming Johnson's important mentor, confidant and advisor, calling him the first apostle to the South Seas. Newton, with friends such as William Wilberforce, founded the Eclectic Society, seeing Johnson as the means of sending the gospel to the other side of the globe. It was William Wilberforce in 1786 suggested to then Prime Minister William Pitt to have a chaplain. The first service conducted on Australian soil was an impressive occasion. Careful preparations were made, the convicts being ordered to appear as clean as circumstances will permit, and no man to be absent on any account whatever. The guard was to be changed earlier than usual so as to give those who had been relieved time to cleanse themselves before church, and the church drum was to beat at 10 o'clock. So it started the service at 10 o'clock that morning on that first Sunday they were there. The fleet had been in Sydney Cove the previous Sunday, 27th of January, but no service was held until some semblance of order had been created on shore. The service taking place the following Sunday, the 3rd of February, 1788, on a nearby grassy hill that's just past the quay, the text being Psalm 116, verse 12, "What shall I render unto the Lord?" And it goes on and says, "For all his benefits to me." And so we certainly have been benefited, haven't we? So what contents reported that the behaviour of both the troops and convicts was equally regular and attentive. Little is known about Richard's wife, Mary, as there is only one letter recorded on her corresponding with her friends and relatives. She must have been a very pioneering, courageous, adaptable, patient, caring woman. Johnson was a man of prayer and hope, looking beyond the immediate and mortal, believing in God's sovereign purposes for this new nation. He had brought with him over 4,000 pieces of Christian literature, including 100 Bibles and 400 New Testaments. He was Australia's pioneer educationalist, and he was also involved in starting the first orchards and so on, and a number of agricultural things just for them to survive. So that's the story of Richard Johnson, and a lot of things can be learnt about him on the website that we have, nchs.net.au. That's www.nchs, National Christian History Sunday, the initials of that, nchs.net.au. So that's been very important, I think, for a lot of literature, and also the other website, chr.org.au, which has a lot of our Christian heritage. A lot of people have written books on the information on it, quite frankly.
Look, it's amazing because I didn't even realise, I'm going to be honest with you, until very recently, that William Wilberforce was involved in the selection of that first chaplain, Richard Johnson. Now, for any of our listeners who don't know William Wilberforce, he was the man responsible for the abolition of slavery in the British Empire, and he was a very well-known Christian leader 200 years ago, and yet he was thinking about Australia, praying about Australia, and was instrumental, wasn't he, in the selection of Richard Johnson as our very first chaplain.
Yeah. Now, I could say something else. Now, this is Captain Arthur Phillip's instructions that were given to him in April 1787, the year before, or just actually about 9 months before. Well, actually, not that because they sailed and settled, didn't they? Yeah, in January. So they would have been sailing soon after. He was to enforce a due observance of religion and good order among the inhabitants, and take such steps for the due celebration of public worship as circumstances would permit. In the first draft of these instructions, he was to grant full liberty of conscience and the free exercise of all modes of religious worship not prohibited by law, providing his charges were content with a quiet and peaceable enjoyment of the same, not giving offence or scandal to government. He was to cause the laws against blasphemy, profaneness, adultery, fornication, polygamy, incest, profanation of the Lord's day, swearing and drunkenness to be rigorously executed. And he was not to admit to the office of justice of the peace any person whose ill fame or conversation might occasion scandal. And so that was just part of the instructions. That's amazing. And yet the first generation of young kids was just like that because of the education system that Richard Johnson set up. And you know, they're called the currency lads and lasses, of course, but they were totally different to their parents. Matter of fact, one of the judges said, who'd been living there a while, he said that there's only one person on a minor problem that ever came before the courts.
Incredible.
Of that generation, because they were educated in the Christian faith. And there's, you know, we need to get back to those ideals.
Absolutely. But let's talk about Richard Johnson. Did he struggle or wrestle with the calling to Australia, Graham, or did he just jump at the opportunity?
Well, he didn't. And I'll just read a little letter that he wrote prior to coming to Australia. He said the feelings which I had upon receiving this letter of asking him to go to the colony, the feelings which I had upon receiving this letter and for some time after are easier felt than described. For several nights and days, both my sleep and appetite were in a great measure taken away. I did little else than weep and sigh, whilst I trust both my fervent prayer and fasting. I implored divine direction and to do it in an fair or so weighty moment. This is the old English, right? So if it's a bit unclear, but I'm reading the original. On the other hand, the idea of leaving my parents, relations, friends, and the respectful connections which I had formed, the dangers of the sea, the descriptions of people I was going with, the place of which we were going to the very ends of the earth, to a country wild and uncultivated, to be exposed to savages and perhaps to various wild beasts of prey, these and such like ideas so impressed my mind with fear and terror that I sometimes was greatly inclined and almost resolved to decline the offer. But then, on the other hand, when I considered the propriety, nay, the necessity of some person going out in this capacity, how the offer of the appointment was made to me, my situation at that time having no charge of my own, the hopes and prospects of being rendered useful in the reformation of these poor and abandoned people, the power and promises of God to protect me in any place of situation we're in the line of duty, I followed the leading of providence and the prospects of a glorious reward hereafter, laid up in heaven for God's faithful servants and people. These considerations overbalanced and removed all my scruples and fears and induced me to give me free consent to enter upon this hazardous expedition. And it was dangerous. I mean, it's like going to the moon for them.
Absolutely, yeah. And so he was naturally speaking not really that keen to come, was he? But out of a sense of obedience and a sense of call, he came to Australia to be a blessing. And in many ways, it's a metaphor, isn't it, for the history of the church in Australia? There's always been this wrestle, hasn't there? There's just been this contention for Australia between the spiritual and the physical.
Yeah. Yeah, Manning Clark describes that a lot in his history of Australia, the battles going on between the Enlightenment, the Reformation, and between people like this. So, yeah, there's the theme of Manning Clark's, which my wife, Pam, after she'd lost her third child, in pregnancy, that is, 6 months, 6 months, and 6 months. We've also lost a child from a cot death, but that's another story too, because out of death, life comes forth. John 12:24. But it was interesting that she read Manning Clark's first two volumes that he'd published, and she said, these people are Christians, a lot of these founders are Christians. And he wrote in a pretty sarcastic way, but and he's a descendant himself of a well-known, of Marsden, actually. But anyway, that's another story. But I'd just like to read Richard Johnson's a letter he wrote on the 4th of October, 1791. I'm persuaded that I'm where God aims and intends me to be. And until I see my way more clearly than I do at present, I think it my duty to abide where I am. I have still cause to lament and complain with Isaiah 59:1-3. But I hope and trust I have not laboured wholly in vain, and I trust in time in reply of all opposition and obstacles. And he did have opposition even by one of the governors, but some of them, were, like Macquarie, were just on side. God will make bare his holy arm in the conversion and salvation of the souls of men. Our colony begins to increase greatly. Last Sunday I preached, I suppose, to not less than 600 or 800, and I have since heard that one at least went away sorrowful and heavy-hearted, and some others rejoicing in the Son of God manifest towards them. I endeavour always to adapt my discourse to the state and capacities of my people generally. My sermons are upon the awful strain, as was the case last Sunday. And the text for Proverbs 19:21, the first part of 1 Peter 4:18. But I know that this is not the only way of working conviction upon the conscience, and see it necessary and find it precious work, as I trust, to speak of the great and inestimable love of Jesus in dying for sinners and inviting them to come to him, to believe in and rest upon him for life and salvation. Now, he led several people to the Lord of being hanged just before they got hanged, or the weeks before. And so there's some remarkable things that he did. He was a very strong person, one say, but it did affect his health. He did have to row a boat up the Parramatta River later on when they settled there to do services there before Marsden. So there's a number of things I could really share that were very interesting about Marsden, not Marsden particularly, but about a lot of the educators and even the explorers. There are many explorers that open up, like Charles Sturt, who is a devout Christian, and opened up South Australia, where in 1836 South Australia was founded. And Robert Torrens, speaking in the Parliament, the House of Commons in London in 1826, said that we are the chosen people for the gospel to spread over the earth as the waters cover the sea. And this is in Parliament from a verse in Habakkuk. So I could go on at length, but there's a lot of this material on the CHR website, .org.au, and we could have a course. In actual fact, there is a course being started in Western Australia that will be developed on a lot of this material and on our website to teach people and give them at least a TAFE 3 certificate. So there's good things coming ahead.
It's a wonderful initiative, Graham. And this Sunday is National Christian Heritage Sunday. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about that? What does that mean? What does that look like?
Well, the thing is that it also expresses what I mentioned about South Australia and things like the coming of the light. Because not only did the gospel arrive in Australia, the mainland, on the 1st of July 1871, the London Missionary Society, and some of my wife's family were missionaries with the London Missionary Society to Tanura and other places, and that's a whole story in itself, but to Dunley Island, which is Arab, and with the Reverend Samuel McLennan and 7 others, and they brought the light, and there's a guy called Dabad, and he almost, I think, sacrificed his life so that they could hear the gospel there. He was a warrior. And the thing is that they changed because they were killing each other. All these islanders there in the various islands were killing each other. And that's why they call it the coming of the light, because they stopped killing each other. And many are Christians. Matter of fact, they disgrace us, us white Aussies. And also the first Indigenous evangelist was a guy called Dickey, and he was the son of Abaru or Barong, and whose husband was Benelong. You know, Benelong at Circular Quay. Yeah. So amazing. There's an interesting history. Yeah, but the thing is, he came under conviction because he stayed with and cared for by Mary Johnson, Richard Johnson's wife, and so there are all these stories that are beautiful that we just need the time to talk about. And
but we can find out about them on the website, can't we? So just repeat again that website for our listeners if they want to look this up.
Yeah, well, that's chr.org.au, and the nchs.net.au is the National Christian Heritage Sunday. Now, you did ask about things that we could talk about, but the beginnings are very important, and there are a number of things that you can participate in, but it's a Sunday where you do it in your church principally, and so the local church, and they can also share about their own history of their denomination or the missionaries that they've sent out and so on. And it'd be great to compile all these just for history's sake. And so there are resources there, all these talks by Richard Johnson. There's a whole book written on Richard Johnson and Marsden's letters back to England and to their friends. So there's a lot of information there. There's a little program that you can use there. It's got the wrong date on it because I've had difficulty getting into the website because my poor webmaster died of cancer just recently and we can't get in the back end of it. So don't worry about the dates. So there's the 2nd and the 7th, but it's actually the 4th, this Sunday. So there's a lot of information. There's a couple of books, Southland of the Holy Spirit. That's a good book, and there's others on the National Christian Heritage side. I can actually talk about the hymn that they could sing if they wanted to. It's not new. It's a hymn written by John Newton of Amazing Grace fame, and there's the tune which I've got up there on the website. It's called Woodlands, Tell My Soul, and this is what Newton said: "The Lord who sends thee hence and will be thine aid, in vain at thee the lion danger roars. His arm and love shall keep thee undismayed on tempest-tossed seas and savage shores. Go bear the Saviour's name of lands unknown to the southern world, his wondrous peace. An energy divine thy word shall own, and draw their untaught hearts to seek his face. Gold or empty fame, or venture near the poles, a reward name to spread his and win immortal souls." So the southern is called of the hemisphere.
Yeah. Graham, there's so much here. There's so much rich Christian history in Australia. And I think we've given people a teaser today, but I would encourage everyone to go to those websites. And also this Sunday, hopefully many of us can celebrate the National Christian Heritage Sunday. But Graham McLennan, I want to thank you so much for your time today.
Good on you. Pleasure.